Welcome to the Polymath Polycast, a show about becoming a polymath and all the areas of interest in between. I am Dustin Miller, poly-innovator. Today I'm talking with Brenden Kumarasamy, the communication expert and founder of Master Talk. We are talking about today becoming the #1 speaking coach in the world and how to help people achieve rocket level success and impact. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. Please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
What's up, innovators? Hope you're doing well.
We were talking a little bit beforehand about Master Talk and speaking and just kind of our interest, and I figured we might as well just get started because we had that chemistry already. And let's kind of dive right in. Share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Well, this is a nice question. I would say probably one fact that not many people know is I speak 3 languages, but I can karaoke in 8.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that, or I think it was in the video or something like that. You had a karaoke video on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, you do your research. Yeah, I do. Yeah, exactly. So I always like to bring odd analogies outside of communication so that people relate to the field a lot more. So karaoke, dance, theater, I have all of these odd topics that I use to blend in communication.
I really like that. There's actually a guy named Richard Feynman who's known as like the great explainer, and he was able to break down various concepts through his like technique and his method. And really the simplicity of that was just that he was able to communicate with people and break it down to a simple manner. And I think that's really the beauty of teaching as well. So even being a coach like yourself, and I'm actually a personal trainer and swim instructor as well, so I have that coaching experience. And just being able to break it down for somebody, or more importantly, like you say, kind of translate it in a way for a skill they might know and translate it into the skill you're trying to teach. That's a really beautiful concept.
I love that. And it's so cool that you're a swim coach and a fitness coach as well.
I really actually want to dive right into that karaoke. I know we have other topics that I sent you over, but what's your favorite karaoke song?
Oh, you're asking me a lot of interesting questions. Karaoke song. So what's interesting about me in karaoke is I actually sing in most of the languages that I actually don't speak in. Right. So a lot of my favorite karaoke songs are actually in Korean.
Oh, right. Yeah, some K-pop or something like that.
Yeah, like K-pop's like BTS and just weird. Just lots of great songs that people are just jamming to. And they start freaking out because I start singing in Korean. I don't sing well, by the way. But when I start singing in Korean, they start going, whoa, what?
Well, I was on the video on your website too, and all of a sudden you just started speaking French, and I'm like, oh, you switched over very fluidly. And it's actually kind of interesting. We have that kind of similar mindset with languages. I really want to become a polyglot, so someone who speaks at multiple languages. I speak Spanish relatively fluently. I grew up with Spanish speakers, but I don't necessarily know like 3 like you, let alone because Tamil is the 3rd one, right? French, English, Tamil. Yeah. I think that having a lot of that changes your brain too.
100%. And to be frank with you, I got really lucky that I was able to learn 3 languages. Because when I was 5 years old, my parents looked at me and they said, you live in Montreal, which is in Canada. Yeah. And they said, well, you need to learn how to speak French, but I didn't know how to speak French. So they put me in a French curriculum. That's how I learned French.
That's good. Comment ça va?
Ça va très bien.
There you go.
Love it.
And back on the karaoke concept, like, what's the song that you choose? Like, for example, I do Queen Fat Bottom Girls every time I go to a new venue. That's like the first song I do because Queen is my jam. And that's kind of like my tradition. I have to do it first. What is your song that you like to do?
We usually like to do Sean Paul.
Okay.
Because nobody knows how to like to keep going with the song because he just says a bunch. But I just get on the mic and I just go blah blah blah. And they go whoa.
I love how we're just kind of right into like the karaoke instead of some of the other topics. But actually, like I think you kind of resonate with this too. I taught myself how to sing by going to karaoke.
I love that. Yeah, and I taught. For me, I didn't really learn how to sing, but I learned how to pronounce words through karaoke and have a good time. I think what's great about karaoke is it allows you to get out of your comfort zone because in most areas in your life, you don't really have the cultural permission to talk loud. Like if you yell in the public setting, people are going to say, hey, why are you yelling? But in karaoke, you can do whatever you want and no one really cares.
Well, and like I've gone to multiple different bars for it, but the one I mainly go to, Eastside Tavern, is like kind of like a dive bar. So even there's like even more open-minded. If you do something stupid, they're just gonna be like, okay, whatever. So kind of going into the actual questions here, you're passionate about helping others achieve rocket level success. Why does that matter?
Yeah, it matters for many reasons, but I think at the fundamental level, there's 2 things. So the first one is just my upbringing. Okay. My mother is probably the most generous person I know. And, just the way that we're brought up in our culture. But the second thing that I believe is important is I believe in this idea that if we win the lottery, which is most people in Canada or the United States, or really, most industrialized countries, I believe it's our moral responsibility to share that success with everyone else. It's just the way that rocket level success morphs is different for other people. For you, it's the podcast. For me, it was initially through just giving advice to people one-on-one, helping people with their homework. And then it transitioned to what it is today with Master Talk and helping the world master an art that not many people fully can master yet, but hopefully can with the channel.
And fully grasp. And I think speaking and coaching is one of those things where it's kind of hard to learn. Like there's plenty of people teaching it, but not necessarily an easy way to like truly adopt it. I took a public speaking class in high school. And it's one of the best classes I took. I don't remember a lot of stuff I learned because it was obviously a long time ago, but it's one of those things you really do have to practice. Ability to project, the ability to captivate an audience and understand them. Yeah, totally understand. I like that. Why does it matter to you personally?
Yeah, for public speaking specifically, I would say at the beginning, I mostly learned the skill just to get a really good corporate job, to be completely transparent. I was like, I did a lot of case competitions. I want to help people get better communication. Was a gift I had. But as I progressed with Master Talk that started in my basement, I just took my phone and I started recording stuff. What I realized over time was that there was a ridiculous amount of people who wanted to make a big difference in the world, but didn't have access to the right tools on how to communicate better. And even if they understood the value of communication, they couldn't afford a speech coach, which is really expensive for most people. So there's this weird dichotomy between the people who wanted to make a difference and the people who couldn't because they didn't have access to those tools. So the way that I think of it and why it matters to me is I want to be the bridge for every purpose-driven entrepreneur to master communication, but more importantly, long after I'm gone. Because communication is one of the few skills that is immortal. Like it'll last forever, regardless of how technology advances. So if I can crack that problem, and I think I have a good grasp of it, I can influence every person after me.
Yeah, I love that. And the whole idea of legacy, when a lot of people like you and I who are trying to be entrepreneurs and successful impact people, when you start thinking about legacy and that starts driving your goals, I think that's what really kind of catalyzes that success. Also, I love the word dichotomy. It's something I've been using a lot lately too. And the way you convey that topic using that word, I think was very effective. And it's interesting how when you want to leave a legacy, your actions change. You start creating more for the sake of creating. I saw a lot of videos on your YouTube channel that were really geared towards helping people. And it seemed like you learned a lot of the ideas behind having a good YouTube channel pretty early on, because you have the thumbnails nice and strong. You had a lot of call to actions in it, which I noticed, which was good. Even that, like, I went down to your first video and I saw how it was like a phone camera basically on there. And but that's the thing where a lot of people don't start. It took me a long time to even get to my YouTube channel because I was nervous of being on camera. Now I don't mind as much. I had to really get around that. But I started out with the podcast first because it was easier to get used to my voice than seeing myself on camera. So I think that getting people started, like either on YouTube, podcasting, just creating in general, but getting past that hurdle to actually just starting, I think is half the battle. And I think you're a great example of just like, hey, he just got down and started making content. He just started creating, and that's perfect.
I love that. And I find, just to build on your point there, it's a lot of people struggle with this idea of how do I start? When should I start? What gear should I buy?
Yeah.
But I also find, Dustin, that a lot of the advice that is given is also pretty rubbish. Oh, just get started. Like, what is that going to do for people? So my advice for people is to answer the following question. Who is suffering from your inability to take action? Or rather, who is suffering from your inaction? The more specific you are, the better and more motivated you'll become to take that action. Because every single day that you decide not to do something, you decide to not start that YouTube channel, that podcast, or really a business or a project or anything, is a day that you're wasting and hurting other people. Just to give you context, I started Master Talk at 22. Who am I to be a 22-year-old sharing communication tips when there's PhDs in the field that also share tips on YouTube? So why me? Why did I do this? And the way that I overcame that was because of the countless millions of people around the world But if I were to even go as far, billions of people, for the people that will long live after me, that are 15 years old, that want to make a difference in the world, they look up public speaking tips on YouTube, and what do they find? Let's say we take a girl named Julia who wants to present in a classroom, right, to raise money for a charity. She writes public speaking tips, and what does she find? She finds a bunch of old white dudes who don't know anything about public speaking and who can't serve as a model for her to master communication. So the belief system that she has that, oh, I can't master public speaking, will live for the rest of her life if I don't take action. So I'm very clear about the intention. So if you figure out who's suffering from your inaction, you'll run like a bullet train, essentially.
Well, and it's almost kind of like, in the kind of marketing or sales term, the buyer persona. Like, who are you creating content for? Like, who are you trying to sell to? Like, regardless of the mindset you have behind it, just identifying your target audience. And that's actually something I've struggled with in the past too, because as a polymath, I don't necessarily want to target just one kind of person, but in the sub niches I try to. But for the most part, taking that step of identifying that person and trying to really break it down, like, who's this person that I'm creating content for? And when you do that, you start changing how you make the content and work on, like, hey, these are the tidbits I really want to convey, and mainly for this kind of person. And that way, that one person you're targeting towards could be like 1 million people, like you said. It's just a matter of like, hey, you're not making it for 1 million people. You're making it for this person. You're making it for Julia, who happens to be, there's a lot of Julias out there, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How can purpose-driven entrepreneurs achieve their dream?
So what I always tell purpose-driven people, because I think the big issue in that, that for people in that category is not really achieving the dream, but figuring out what the dream is.
Yeah.
Right. Because most people struggle with finding a passion, or what should I do? And then they get stuck because they don't know what to do, and then they end up doing nothing. So I would say in that persona, in that lens of looking at the question, the best way to find a passion is to steal someone else's.
Okay.
So what this means is, like, just to give you context, 5 years ago, if you told me I was going to start a YouTube channel, I would have called you crazy. All I wanted to do was make multiple six figures, get a corporate job, and be done with it, and that was it. But what happened was, as I started getting more success in the corporate world, and I started realizing very quickly that money was not going to really add much value to my life besides just meeting my immediate needs and my family's needs, I started really to ponder, what can I be doing for society? And for 3 years, I never had an answer. It was more just, I don't know, what's a passion? How do I find a passion? Yeah. So what I started to do instead, because most people lose a lot of time doing that, because time is your most precious asset, right? But what I started to do was I started researching people who already had visions for the world. Because a common misconception is a lot of people tend to believe that the individuals who are successful always wanted to do that thing. Oh, Steve Jobs was born wanting to start Apple. Oh, Lewis Howes, who started School of Greatness, just always wanted to do a podcast. That's not how it works. And you know this. At the beginning, they were following somebody else's vision. Steve Jobs cold called Hewlett Packard when he was 12 years old, HP. He started working there, and then he worked at Atari. Lewis was mentored by other people. Everyone starts as a number two, as fulfilling somebody else's vision. I was no different. And then in that journey, as I was helping somebody else, I found my own vision.
Definitely. And it's one of those things too, where it's not even like copying another person's idea or like a vision, so to speak. It's more about learning from it in a way. There's a book right here, Steal Like an Artist, where essentially it's kind of the same concept where you're not stealing the actual like art that they're doing. Someone who copies Van Gogh's Starry Night's picture and does it his own way or her own way is not copying that piece of art. It's just copying that kind of style, that effect that image was supposed to convey. And so the whole point of the music industry is just kind of recreating the old sounds that was made before. There's tons of songs nowadays are sampled after older songs. And it's that same kind of idea with a purpose and why. You're not necessarily stealing it. You're just kind of repurposing it for your own gains, so presumably for the game of others in the world. And it's interesting that you mentioned like Steve Jobs too. I was listening to an audiobook the other day about how when he was a kid, his dad taught him that when you're painting a fence, you're making one side look beautiful. You need to go on the other side, even if no one ever sees it, and make it beautiful too. And he asked his dad, why do we do that? No one's ever going to see it. But he's like, well, you're going to see it. You're going to know that it's beautiful. And he took that concept, and I don't remember what project he was doing at Apple for it. I don't know if it was the original Macintosh or one of the later ones, but basically the outside of the case, they worked really hard at making the actual shell of the computer awesome and beautiful and really clean and sleek and modern, at least at the time modern. But the inside, he like looked at the motherboard, the PCB of the computer, and it was like just terrible. All the capacitors were randomly placed, the transistors were just scattered about, and he's like, no, this is not okay. He's like, redo it. And they're like, why? No one's ever gonna see it. But like, well, you're gonna see it. And at the end, they managed to make everything look nice and organized and clean, even though no one would ever see it. And so what he did was like he took every person who worked on the Mac, that computer, made them sign a post-it note, put it all on the board, and he put all those signatures on the inside of the shell of that computer, because he said that every artist needs to sign their work. And it's interesting how they took that concept and tried to, like, they made that computer to leave an impact.
I love that. That's amazing.
How has the global virus impacted you?
So for me, it's a bit different. So I always believe you should always look at the opportunity in things. And for me, I guess the bad thing that happened is all my speaking engagements got canceled overnight, which was a bummer.
I remember.
But it's not the end of the world at all. So what happened instead was I started asking myself, now that the main tool that I used to promote my channel has been kind of taken off the table, what can I put back on the table? And this is when the idea for virtual stages started coming up, podcasts, different ways for me to still add value to the community without ever having to leave my house. And what's interesting, Toastmasters is an organization where, like, you know this, but I'm just explaining for the audience, where a lot of clubs around the world, what they do is they practice public speaking together. What happened with those 16,000 clubs is overnight they all went virtual.
Wow. Yeah.
Which ended up being a great opportunity for me because I started presenting at a lot of those clubs to promote the channel. So I've spoken at clubs in the UK, US, Canada, and India as well, just to add value to people there, because I could never fly there before. So now I can just add value. So it's been cool.
That's awesome. I need to steal that idea. Have you been doing a lot of your own live streaming or just using kind of those platforms?
So mostly, since a lot of my brain power and time is focused on creating the content that we're seeing on the channel, I usually spend my time going on other people's stages and leveraging those. But I still do live, shows with my own Instagram, my own audience. But yeah, I'm mostly spending time adding value to other people's stages.
Nice. So you focus more on Instagram, or do you do any like Facebook Live, YouTube Live, anything like that? Which
Mostly Instagram and YouTube. So my opinion on social is, I think that it's important to be on all of them for sure and without a doubt. But I also believe there should be what Roy Vaden calls the relationship HQ. Like, where do you want the biggest growth? And for me, it's 100% YouTube, because a lot of the educational stuff, I usually don't have time to teach it in a minute on Instagram, or like a minute and a half. See, podcasts are great too, or, YouTube channel. So I've been mostly focused on YouTube and Instagram.
On a kind of side note on the idea of repurposing, have you thought about taking your YouTube videos and turning them into podcasts?
Yes, I have, but I'll be honest, I'm just too lazy to do it, I guess. It's something I didn't work on.
There's a tool called Repurpose.io where it basically automatically does it for you.
Oh, that's amazing.
I'll link later. I'll put a link in the description for any audience members too. Because that way you could also break your videos and podcasts into like micro chunks, so like 1-minute videos using that tool, and send it out to different socials as well.
Cool.
Why do you think that the pandemic is an accelerant to where we are supposed to go?
Yeah, and just to build on that, Dustin, I actually think it's an accelerant for everything, for all things. And I'll explain why. So I'll give you some tangible examples. So e-commerce, for instance. Okay. The way that we shop before COVID happened is normal, 50%, 70%, whatever the number is. We'd mix retail and online. But where the future is going, if you look at countries like China, a lot of their shopping is either done very, very close to the place that they live. So it's either something that they order online or simply purely online. So it's literally just online shopping, like Amazon's doing with Whole Foods and things like that. But those trends were still 10, 15 years out, where most consumers would buy or wouldn't go to on physical locations.
Yeah.
What happened with that trend, similar to people working from home and using more Zoom calls all got circumvented, where all of those trends, all of the old school companies were now forced to adapt. All of the people who are immunocompromised were forced to order groceries online. So in that way, COVID has become an accelerant and also a thriving trend for a lot of businesses, whether it's Shopify, Amazon, and all of those companies. But more interestingly for us, it's also an accelerant to discovering who we are. So what most humans do, I find, is they go through life following what other people want. And then they wake up at 45 or 50 years old and they say, where has my life been?
Yeah.
Right. I just worked at this 20 years. I make multiple six figures. I got married. I got the kids. And then they wake up at 45 and have what we call the midlife crisis.
Yeah.
But what's fun about COVID is that most people are having that midlife crisis now.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So now, because they're stuck with a partner that they actually realized they didn't want to be with, but could avoid, but now can't. So it's an accelerant for those things as well.
Yeah, accelerant for personal growth. And I think an alternative kind of term you could use even is like hypergrowth. Thinking about how businesses often fail or succeed during recessions and depressions, and how I'm wondering which companies are either going to hypergrow or which ones are just going to die out. And because how Toys R Us made a bad deal with Amazon when they first kind of were a thing online, when Amazon was the first thing. And they were like, oh, you can just have our toys. We'll be the only toy distributor on your platform. They thought it was a good deal for them. They didn't realize that they needed to be their own e-commerce store. And that's what led to Toys R Us dying out, because Amazon ended up becoming bigger than them. And Amazon actually kind of screwed them over and started having other toy services as well. And so it's interesting how they died out because of that lack of being able to change, let alone in a quick manner. Had they done it right away, they would have been even better off. People like you and I kind of transitioning to online and being able to be that online creator. In fact, the first guest I had, Dale Brockda, on the show, he's a live presenter, not like a speaker like you per se, but more of like an entertainer. And he's having to transition as well into live performances. And it's very interesting seeing how people are doing that. And it's amazing how if you're quick on the draw, you can really take advantage of this opportunity.
Completely agree. If you're quick on the draw and you see the opportunities and you really understand the future at a level none of your competitors do, you'll always come up on top.
Do you have any advice for people to kind of be on that hyper growth mindset?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that it starts with clarity. What is it that you actually want? So the first step that I recommend people to do is ask yourself the hard questions.
Mm-hmm.
So an easy example of a question you can think about, because most people listen to the answers of other people, but they don't ponder it for themselves. So one example is, if you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? Yeah. Not the money, but how would you spend the time? Would you still go to work? Would you wake up at 9? Would you wake up at 7? What happens during the day? Are you even in the same country every week? So a lot of people, when I ask them this question, they always say, oh, I'm going to travel. I always respond with, how long are you going to travel for? 20 years, 30 years? Yeah, where are you going to go? But how long? When does the travel end? And then what do you do? So people don't really think about their life as a spectrum. Yeah. And asking yourself hard questions like, what is the truth that you believe in that most people disagree with you on, which is a question I got from Peter Thiel. It forces you to answer something controversial, which most humans aren't willing to do. So the first step is always to ask yourself the hard questions, discover yourself in the fastest possible way, and then capitalize on hypergrowth. Because you can only capitalize on hypergrowth if you understand what you want to capitalize on.
Yeah. And it's one of those things too, where you have to understand the macro perspective and being able to see it in the big picture. And I think that a lot of people have a hard time viewing that. I don't know how you might have adopted that. I don't know, maybe you've always been kind of the big picture kind of guy, or if you had to learn that after being the details guy. But personally, I've always been that kind of head in the clouds kind of person, and had being opposite. I can't figure out the details half the time. I knew where I wanted to go, but I had no idea how to get there. So depending on which end of the spectrum you're on, too detail oriented, too head in the clouds, you have to find that middle ground in order to really get clarity, like you say, to really make that progress and that hypergrowth.
Absolutely. And the way I did that was, after I made the list of the people I admired, the next question I asked myself was, I studied them. So How did they get to their success, and how can I circumvent that success? And what's been interesting with podcasts is you can enter somebody's life for an hour or two.
Mhm.
And if they don't add any value to your life, you don't have to listen to them anymore.
Right.
But if they do, you just found yourself someone to model your life again. So I do that with hundreds of people. And what the gift that's given me is I've learned from all those people at a very, very young age, because I probably listen to 5 hours of podcasts a day now. So
Wow.
I'm very ruthless in that way, because since I'm inside now all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I've been definitely listening more to, or like audiobooks on a walk or something like that. It's actually kind of interesting how we were already kind of talking about this with clarity, but when someone is purpose driven, they can often get stuck in their head in the clouds, or in the clouds, so to speak. How can they get down to that nitty gritty? How can they be detail oriented?
Right. And I believe the key there is to really understand, what are you doing, who's it for, and how does it benefit other people? So for me, when I started Master Talk, it wasn't about helping Julia and the millions of other purpose-driven entrepreneurs that will ever live. No, it was more just, I went on YouTube, I had some popcorn, I watched my competitors and their content, and I realized that the content was rubbish.
Yeah.
So I took my phone out the week after, or like 2 weeks after. I was really scared to post, but hey, I cared enough to do it. And I sat on my couch and I started making videos. And then slowly over time, my thesis for Master Talk, my thesis for what I wanted to do with the channel, started getting more and more and more specific. So just realize that at the beginning, for your audience, it won't start that way. But what it'll start with is an inconsistency in what people believe. So I'll give you a super easy example. Airbnb.
Yeah.
If I told you 10 years ago that you were going to sleep in strangers' houses and that you would actually pay those people, you'd be like, are you crazy? Like, doesn't make sense. But the great companies are always built on a secret. This is what Peter Thiel argues in his book, 0 to 1, is built on this idea that most people disagree with, that a small group of people agree with. Yeah. So your job, I believe, as a purpose-driven entrepreneur, is to find those secrets, because all you need is one to build an entire innovation and an entire building block for society to benefit from. So for me, it was public speaking and YouTube. Right. And then from that secret, that's when you start adding more details as you get slowly more obsessed with making it come true.
I love that. And I think, not to talk about myself too much because it's an interview, so to speak, but one of the reasons why I started making PolyInnovator was because of the modular degree, a do-it-yourself education that I've come up with, where people can take online courses or podcasts or ebooks, all these educational resources, and have some way to organize them. And it's really kind of pioneering this framework of education, because like you're saying, how people are growing into online space, right? We're changing e-commerce, we're changing how to work at home, we're changing how to have school at home. And people have realized that, hey, going to college on a Zoom call is not the same. We're not getting the same value that we would in person. But they're also thinking too, like, if I'm just going to be at home, I might as well just do it on my own. And some people are very frustrated with how the schooling has handled that. And I think that how this hypergrowth from the pandemic is going to really kind of accelerate the modular degree, but also the self-education in general.
Absolutely. And I love what you mentioned there, like, understand where the future is going in relation to the secret you want to work on. And then from that, or that insight that you have, and then build against that.
Definitely. Where do you see public speaking evolving with this hypergrowth from the pandemic?
Yeah, so for public speaking in general, I think what's going to happen is a lot of people have suddenly realized that they have no experience presenting online and on Zoom calls. And as you probably know, online presentations are a lot more difficult than in-person ones, for the simple reason that when you're in an in-person presentation, you tell a joke, you can see how the audience reacts to you. You're like, oh, this is a funny joke. But when you're on a Zoom call with 100 people and you say a joke alone in your basement, even if it is funny, you'll never know. Like, was it funny? So you kind of have to have the confidence to say, I'm going to tell a joke and I'm going to assume that it is funny. That is a difficult shift.
Going kind of back to the karaoke idea, I wanted to be a better speaker. I've always been a talkative person, which has not been a good thing for me for the most part, because I wouldn't be able to convey my points, and people would think I was annoying or something like that. So I use karaoke not only as a way to learn how to sing, but also a way to learn how to communicate and like approach people. So not just like some pretty face at the place, but also just making friends. There was one night I made a challenge for myself to high five as many people as possible, just to kind of get out of my comfort zone and also talk to as many people. I managed to get 107 high fives that night. And it was just, yeah, it was interesting how that challenge and trying to get yourself to face it, like you said, it made me into a more social person. But that stuff I learned, even though I was able to read the body language more, read the micro expressions, understand tonality, and be able to communicate, even being on stage, having that, the first time I ever sang a song, my leg was shaking for how nervous I was, right? And I'm sure you might have experience that you could share here in a moment too, about how maybe when speaking on stage, there's that kind of battle you have to go over and hurdle.
Absolutely. Like, just to give you context, Dustin, when I was 5 years old, and my parents sent me to French school, but I didn't know how to speak French. For the first 15 years of my life, not only was I uncomfortable with presentations, but I had to give presentations in a language I didn't even know.
Oh,
So
man.
when I would walk up on stage, I would be like, bonjour, and then I wouldn't know what to do next. So all of that, so that fear of public speaking is definitely something I can relate to. And by the way, that I still have, just at varying degrees. And the best way to crush that fear is to care so much about your audience that it gets crushed.
Yeah.
So a good example was when I did a keynote a couple of months ago, and it's like a 20-minute presentation to a group of 15-year-olds. And I was told that I had 20 minutes and it was going to be in English. Then I walk into the room 20 minutes before the presentation. And then the executive looks at me and he says, oh, by the way, Brenda, I need you to do this presentation in French and English.
Oh, no.
Because half the room only speaks French. And most speakers, when you ask them the question,
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Like, how would you, like, what happens if you don't do a good job? They would say, well, it's not my fault.
Yeah.
This is not my fault. I can't do anything about it. But an exceptional presenter will never say that. They would say instead, well, if I don't do a good job, what happens is it is my fault, because all of those kids that are sitting there look to me as the communication expert, and their fundamental belief system is that I can't master public speaking. And if I don't shift that mindset in the 20 minutes that I have, they will believe that for the rest of their lives. So I don't care if I need to present it in a language I don't know, I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah.
That's very different.
Well, it's that mental shift, that acuity and that kind of clarity of like, hey, I am that presenter. I need to figure out how to do this. And a good, like you said, a good presenter would, or even a great presenter in this case, would be that kind of person. Like, hey, it's not a problem that I need to necessarily take credit for. It's just a problem I need to fix. You know what I mean? Like, don't make it a problem in the first place. Figure out how to make it into a solution. Because that one presentation probably could, if you weren't already having a history of French, that one presentation, like, hey, let's say I've never done a presentation in French. I speak it, but I've never done one before. And they come up with that to me, like, hey, you need to do it in English and French. That one presentation could be the catalyst to you doing a whole French speaking career.
Exactly. Completely agree.
How does one master talking or become a master talker?
I think it begins by getting really clear on your public speaking why. And the reason it's so important, so understanding the reason why you want to master communication, is because public speaking is something anyone can master. I fundamentally believe that. But it is something very few people do because of the lack of accountability in the skill. So I'll give you a super easy example. Let's say me and you were running a marathon together. So in 6 months, me and Dustin are running a 40-miler. We're getting ready for the marathon and we're practicing every week, but I'm lazy. I don't want to get up in the morning to practice. Well, if you're banging on my door at 5 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to get up and I'm going to run, because the goal that we're trying to achieve is extremely tangible. This week we run 5 miles. Next week we run 10. And I can visualize ourselves running across the finish line and me holding that participation ribbon, right? For running the race. So because of that, the goalpost that we're trying to achieve is very clear.
Yeah.
But in public speaking, that goalpost doesn't exist. What does it mean to be a good speaker anyways? Pausing more? Using low vocal variation? There's actually no answer to the question. And that's precisely why public speaking is hard to hold yourself accountable to, because you don't know what you're thriving towards. You don't know what you sound like as an exceptional speaker. You don't know where you actually want to go. That's why you need to have somebody who's helping you like a friend, somebody who wants to master public speaking, a Toastmasters club, some sort of accountability system where you say, this is why I want to do it. So get clear on your public speaking why. That would be my tip.
Also, there's two ways I wanted to kind of take this from that. Accountability and skill acquisition, I think, is the kind of way I wanted to go about it. But if you take it down to a lower notch, not even just public speaking in general or talking, but even just a skill acquisition sort of thing, because you're practicing that skill of speaking, you're practicing that ability to convey that information. All that really is just learning this micro skills, like, hey, how do you speak? How do you project your voice? How do you read an audience? How do you imagine them in their underwear if you're nervous? Whatever kind of skill, micro skill that you're working towards, finding a way to combine that together and become the actual overall macro skill of public speaking. And it's kind of like your role as a coach or my role as a swim coach, breaking down the skill of swimming or speaking and being able to convey that to a new person. That's the real beauty of having a coach, is that you could skip past you trying to figure it out, or even the modular degree like I've been trying to talk, where it's not about you making it on your own. You don't have to make your own degree if you have someone teaching from the top down.
I agree. That's why my goal has always been, and that's what I realized 3 years into coaching people, is I didn't have time in the world, like in my life, to coach every single person that wanted it. That's why I started creating videos. So at least people have the tangible tips and they know what they're working on. So one easy thing to hold people accountable to and see the progression is to simply ask the following question before you even start making a presentation. And that question is as follows. If this is your last presentation ever, this is the only presentation you'll give in your life, and it could be 30 minutes, 60 minutes. Hey, I'm Dustin. Hey, I'm Brenden. You talk about but your audience only remembers and only will remember one sentence. What do you want that sentence to be? And if you could find an answer to that, you're already halfway there.
Okay. What is your sentence?
Good question. Good follow-up. My question is, or rather my statement for everything that I do with Master Talk and every speech I give on the subject, is I fundamentally believe that leadership and public speaking is taught in the exact same way. When you think about leadership, we all know that leaders are not born. Right? It doesn't make any sense, right? We go through experiences in our life, whether it's the leaders we look up to or the future leaders of tomorrow. We're not born, we're created over leading teams and doing different things. But when we think about public speaking, we don't believe that right now. Oh, no, I'm not a speaker. That's not for me. I'm bored with it. Or these people are bored with it. It's not for me. I don't want to do it.
The self-identity.
Right. And I believe that's completely false, because I went from someone who couldn't even speak in front of 3 people because I couldn't speak French to now I speak to a lot more people. And it was something I learned. So my goal with Master Talk, or my one sentence, is to convince you at the end of every single one of my presentations that if I could do it, you can too.
I love it. And one thing that you kind of conveyed to me is almost this stoic approach in a way. Your self-identity, that self-identification is very stoic in nature, where I was telling a story on one of the other podcasts about how there was these 2 stoic practitioners. One of them had broken a bone and was getting sent to the hospital. And like he was being frantic and just upset because obviously he's in pain. And he thought about his philosophy, the stuff that he's always constantly trying to practice and think about. And he realized, like, how can I react to this situation? How can I identify myself with the situation? Am I the person who's freaking out and having a broken bone and starting to be irate with nurses? Or am I the kind of person that's going to be like calm and collected and be able to convey to the nurses, hey, this is what I need. This is what I'm feeling. Because the nurses are going to have an easier time of doing their job if you're collected, even if you're in pain, like, hey, I'm in a lot of pain. Can you give me some medicine? Being able to convey that, or screaming like, I'm in pain, it's going to be very different. And so he took a step back, reevaluated himself, and was able to kind of approach that situation differently, kind of like how you were doing too. And
absolutely, I completely agree. It's all about the story we tell ourselves, right? And if we tell ourselves a story about, hey, these people master public speaking, why can't I? Right. Then you already got half the battle.
Kind of going on to the next question, how can one become a better presenter? Is it just simply practice, or what?
The best way to become a better presenter is to remember the following statement, which is repetition is excellence in the right way. Yeah. So what most speakers make the mistake of doing, and it's not their fault, it's just the nature of, their work presentations or in person or in class or stuff like that, is they only give most of their presentations once or twice. So let's say they have a work presentation on Friday to give a project update. They get the slides ready, they get everything done, and then they present it, and they never look at the deck ever again. But the best speakers in the world, what they do, if you look at the best TED speakers, the best anything, they've presented the same presentation hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again. Like my keynote that I give to organizations or webinars, I've probably presented now 175 times.
Wow.
And it's probably now that I think it's good. But even for someone like me who's a professional, when I start a new presentation, a new keynote, it sucks the first time. Yeah. It's obviously above average, but it's not wow.
Right.
And that's true with all the best speakers. Gary Vaynerchuk says the same thing over and over and over. Tony Robbins, same thing. Seth Godin has 3 speeches: Purple Cow, Tribes, and This is Marketing. That's it.
Gary Vaynerchuk, like, the moment you said him, he's just like, yep, exactly. Because he's literally said the same thing for almost 2 decades now. Like he started YouTube. Literally, like he might have been in the context of wine. Now he's in the context of social media or marketing. Still the same story and message, where watch what the customers or people are doing and base your decisions off of that, or base your actions off of that. And one thing I was thinking about too is that some of the best speakers in the world are comedians, because they're able to convey that story and that idea in a very concise and overall just entertaining manner. They have to be. Like Gary Vee based his keynotes off of the like 80s and 90s comedian. I can't remember the exact examples, but he's basing that energy and that liveliness off of those comedians. And I think that's a great way to visualize, like, hey, how can I become a better presenter? Well, base it off of some other field, like comedy or even TEDx.
And I love that. And you hinted at a future video I'll have next year about the 3 lessons I learned from stand-up comedians.
Yes.
Like one in particular that's super interesting is comedians really think about this, right? They try to make you laugh. They're trying to build a stage. They're trying to keep you entertained. And all they have is a mic. That is insanely hard. No slides, nothing. Not even people. Yeah. It's just them and a mic. It's insane what they can pull off, especially the best ones in the game.
If you can keep yourself accountable as a presenter or comedian through improv, I think that's really shows your skill as well. I actually did stand-up comedy a few times, and let's just say I didn't do so well because I wasn't prepared enough. It's one of those things where it's when you start to prepare more, you start being ready for it, you can be very good. But if you can also improv on top of that, I think that's what really separates the great from the lows.
Love that.
Moving on to another question here. What creates experiences that stick for a lifetime in your view?
For me, experiences that stick for a lifetime, or experiences you really want to have. So I'll give an example. For me, what I realized every time I audited my life every year, at the end of last year, what I came to the conclusion is I wanted to hang out with exclusively purpose-driven entrepreneurs. Think about it. Let's say you meet someone new every single day.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you meet 300 people a year and you live, I don't know, 50 more years. You're going to meet 15,000 people in your life. The question is, who do you want those 15,000 people to be? The experience in creating something magical with my life is making sure as many people of those 15,000 were people that were building really important things. Because I believe there's a very small percentage of the human population that is going to change the culture for everyone else, that is going to change the paradigm and how we think about life. And my goal is to add value to all of those people. So I need to go out and seek them. So for me, experiences that are really important to me personally, and the goal of this conversation is for you to find those experiences for yourself, is when I'm talking to very high level people who are building very, very obscure and unique things, and me being able to add value to all of them because they all need communication in some way, shape, or form.
I think that you're already doing that with me today in the audience, so thank you for that. I think that is an amazing goal and perspective to have. They say that your personality, or kind of like you as a person, are the culmination of the 5 closest people to you. They say friends, but it's really just people in general. And who do you want those 5 people to be around? Like, do you want them to be the loser friends that you had back in high school? And I know it's kind of harsh to kind of put it that way, or do you want it to be the people, like you're saying, these interesting innovators? And just that's why I use the term innovators in this podcast, is that I want people who are trying to change the world, trying to make things happen, and being able to have those people around me. Like you were saying too, having that podcast guest, each of these guests that's come on has changed my mindset. Just chip, little by little, chipping away at it. And I think that's a very wise decision for you to make, especially at a young age. What, you're probably in the mid-20s like me as well?
Yeah, I'm 24. You got it.
Yeah, same. So we're exact same age essentially then. And so it's one of those things too where, to have that wisdom of learning from others at this young age. Like you said earlier, why would someone want to listen to a 22-year-old? But it's interesting when it comes to skills, you only have to be slightly farther ahead of someone to really be able to help them. And I don't remember, there was a movie based off this recently. I don't remember what his name was, but there was this guy who was able to move around the country and get all kinds of different jobs. He actually impersonated a professor for the longest time simply by reading a chapter ahead of all the students and being able to just present it in the class.
I love that. And just to build on what you were saying, the point of this conversation isn't to be like me and go seek purpose-driven people, but rather, just a super easy example, you have no business, you're just someone who wants to learn.
Mm-hmm.
If you love collecting stamps and nobody else in your city likes collecting stamps, why haven't you spent a little bit of money, a little bit of resources to just fly to a conference where other people like collecting stamps? It's a simple and somewhat weird example, but it demonstrates the point. Yeah. Don't waste the time that you have on earth. Go meet the people you're supposed to meet that you want to talk to. Build relationships with them, because the second major competitive advantage after mindset, I've always believed, is community. If you have people that are just as sharp as you, that are building you up, you are impossible to beat.
If you think about just humanity in general, we're social beings. We're creatures who need the interaction. Even introverted people or extroverted people, but especially like people who don't necessarily always want that social interaction, need social interaction. I was on TikTok at the beginning of the quarantine, and there was a lot of people who were saying, like, making jokes about how introverts were having a time of their life being stuck at home, and then extroverts were having a hard time because they're like 2 days after this started, people are starting to get antsy. They want to be able to communicate with people, talk to people. And I noticed that like about 3 weeks in, a month in, a lot of the introverts were like, oh man, I need social interaction too. Something I asked my guests on the show, what is a polymath to you? And if you explain it too, I'll be happy to.
Yeah, please do.
I think you'll like this concept, especially considering you might have been specializing into that whole field of speaking, but there's a jack of all trades or generalist mentality behind speaking. Like we said earlier, there's a lot of micro skills that you need to learn for that macro skill. You have to become a generalist in order to specialize. A polymath is someone who specializes in multiple areas. So Leonardo da Vinci is a perfect example. My hero, he studied anatomy, he studied physics, he studied the ocular science and be able to understand how light is refracted off of these different surfaces. He studied all kinds of different things. People know him as an artist, but he was a polymath in all these different areas. So what is a polymath to you?
I got you. Perfect. Thanks for the clarification there. So Leonardo is an interesting example because I think he's the exception to the rule. I think most people, what they should be doing, if they really want to serve the world, is to get one thing right and get it exceptionally perfect, and then move on to the next thing. This doesn't apply for everybody. Some people like doing multiple things at the same time. But I've seen from the people I admire and I look up to, that the people who truly make a difference in the world, by far in majority, they focused on one thing and they've became world class at that before moving on to the next thing. Whether it's Lewis Howes with the podcast, every single week, same podcast, different guests, but all the time. Whether it's Phil Knight with Nike, whether it's me with Master Talk, everyone is building one thing, but they're doing it perfectly. So for me, being a polymath means to optimize your own human potential for the service of others. And I believe the best way to do that at a fundamental level is to master one thing first.
Okay, so kind of to break that down a little bit, I agree and disagree with you in a small way. And I think that's beautiful because that's actually one of the reasons why I created this podcast, the Polycast, is to discuss polymathing in a way. A lot of people get misconstrued when the whole concept of specialist versus generalist. There's that one quote that goes around, master of one or master of none. So a lot of people think of a jack of all trades being someone who hasn't mastered anything, but a polymath is a little bit different than jack of all trades. There's someone who's mastered those multiple areas. And I don't necessarily see it. There's two ways to kind of go about a polymath. You can either be someone who does everything at once and tries to master all of it at once, which I've definitely tried, and it doesn't work for the most part, unless you really spend decades doing every single one over time. But the part I agree with you with is that it's actually better to specialize first, focus on one thing. We were talking about social media earlier and how focusing on just like one particular platform for the most part is being like the main hub of communication and engagement. That's what Lewis Howes did too. He focuses purely on LinkedIn at first, but now he's an expert on Instagram. I'm sure he's going to be an expert on TikTok eventually too. And it's just one of those things. And now podcasting. He's a polymath. He's definitely a polymath, but he was able to specialize in one area, then another one, and then another one. And because of that, he became one. And that's where I see polymathy being a very crucial aspect, because people need to be able to innovate. And if you don't have that dichotomy of two different specialties, that won't lead into innovation per se. You can innovate if you are a specialist, but it's very much more of a rare occasion and usually takes a bit of luck than if you knew two different awesome skills and being able to merge them together into a new form.
And I love that. And just to build on this, because I like where this conversation is going, just to add more clarity to what I was thinking, is I believe being a specialist is the way you change the world, but generalized information helps add value to being that specialist.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take Lewis, for example, he, at the end of the day, he is the best at one thing, and that's dissecting information from individuals that nobody else can dissect. So for example, when he had Kobe Bryant on his podcast, he was able to get knowledge from him about love, intimacy, affection that literally no other interviewer that Kobe Bryant has ever had in his life ever got out of him. That's his specialty. Yeah. But the knowledge that he has in general helps feed into that specialty and makes him, if I use the correct term here, makes him more dangerous and unique. So for instance, the 8 years he spent building an online business, since he has money, he can invest a lot of those resources into the podcast and only focus on the quality of the podcast versus the short-term gains. Second thing, when he started transitioning his podcast from audio to video, a lot of people told him it was crazy because he wasn't going to make money anymore because his downloads in a podcast would have went down.
Yeah.
But because videos have more virality to it, since he has that business acumen from his online business experience, he was able to leverage that to say, no, the only thing that matters is getting more viewership and having a bigger impact. So I'm just going to go on video. And that obviously 10x his, if not 100x his podcast. So the point of the story that I think we're pretty much on the same page, we're just looking at this from a different lens, is you should use generalized knowledge to feed into your specialty. But if you don't have a specialty, then you're going to go nowhere in 99% of the cases, in my opinion. I'd rather just give a strong opinion so people like have somewhere to go. So for me, okay, my specialty is public speaking. Even if I like personal development and I would like to be a motivational speaker, at the end of the day, the thing that will change the world for me and my humanity is public speaking. But there's a lot of generalized knowledge that I use to make my specialty so unique that nobody else can copy. So when I use my dance experience, my theater, my improvisation, and also the fact that I speak multiple languages, I'm the only speech coach right now on YouTube that I believe that has a video on how to present in a second language, because I have actually been there and done that. So that ability that has really nothing to do with public speaking adds more into my specialty. So whenever I learn generalized knowledge, I use it to feed into that. So that's what I challenge your viewers to do.
I love that. And yes, if you're listening to this on the podcast or watching on PolyInnovator, take that to heart and really find some way that you can take that width and apply it to your depth. You're talking about how generalists taking these little micro skills and applying it to that specialist. The tree of knowledge, I guess you could say, the width of the branches or how long the branches are, or like how long the tree is, whatever the terminology is. But that's what Elon Musk really talks about too, and being able to break it down into different branches. And segue in just a quick moment. When I talked about the modular degree earlier, one concept I've been really trying to push is skill trees. So in video games, if you go towards a certain skill, you go down a certain path. And I try to use that kind of concept of a skill tree in video games as a learning mechanism. Same with Elon Musk's width versus depth, and how you can take the generalist approach to those micro skills. I kind of see them as micro skills, not so much as actual specialties or skills just yet, because you've only really gotten that first 20 hours, like Josh Kaufman, I think his name was, really talked about how you can get really good at a skill in the first 20 hours, but you're definitely not a master or expert or even adept. You just know that skill. And so it's kind of like you're leveling up on those branches. And I see a polymath as someone who's leveled up at least a few times, like getting adept or journeyman level at multiple different skills. So 3 or 4 or more, that kind of thing. And I think that, like you said, Leonardo da Vinci is kind of an exception. He's like a true polymath who's mastered, or at the very least journeyman, multiple, or I would even say 10 different areas. That's where I want to be. That's where I even have a little quote on my website saying Leonardo da Vinci's successor. That's where I vision myself being, is that polymath who's done multiple areas. But I think the polymath concept itself, you have that specialty. You want to get that width of all that generalist skills as well.
You got it. Exactly. And there's a very good chance, like when I look at my life, I want to also create resources on how I optimized my life through personal development. Yeah. But the thing I need to be focusing on first is getting that first win. So with Master Talk, because right now at current point of time, I do have the skills. I've presented over 500 times when I was 22. I have the skills, but the world doesn't have access to my information yet. Yeah. So I'm focusing all of my focus in the same way Gary Vee spent 8 years just focusing on the wine business, or anywhere. And then from that, maybe potentially I can become a polymath in different areas that I see for myself later in life.
Yeah, being a polymath doesn't have to be immediate. I think that's kind of the human mentality of instant gratification. Like, people don't think polymathy is a good idea because they don't think you can do it so quickly. It's impossible to become a polymath immediately. It takes time. Our lives are relatively long, short on the grand scheme of things, but 80 years, 100 years, depending on how long you live, it's a pretty long time to do a lot of things. Usually people change careers every decade or 2 decades or so anyways. They become a polymath by the time they're old because they've done so many different things. And so I think it's just a kind of a change in the viewpoint of it. And speaking of like Gary Vee, you're talking about how he was applying his knowledge in that one area for a long time. And I think that just being someone who's trying to find their purpose, because you're not going to just know it right off the bat. I think some people like you and I might have a good idea, and we started out in a way like we know where we wanted to go, or we knew some ways to do it. But you have to experiment, really. In order to really find it, you have to try different things. Sometimes you might think that, hey, I really want to be an artist. But then when you start doing art all the time, it's not really your thing. It's not really your ikigai, as they say. It's one of those things that you enjoy doing, like a hobby, but not necessarily a passion. So experimenting with a whole bunch of different areas, being a generalist, being someone who's taking their hands out of multiple cookie jars, and then you can find that special cookie. Like maybe you like oatmeal raisin, not chocolate chip. Finding that one cookie you like and really focusing on it, like you said.
I love that. But one thing I would push back a little on is I think that a lot of influencers like Gary Vee and people in general talk about experimenting things and trying things, and we're not against that, but I also think it's vague advice because most people don't really know what to do with that. So instead, what I would ask people to think about is look at your life in reverse. So instead of just thinking about, like maybe I should try art, or maybe I should try like drawing. Okay, let's, in my opinion, like screw that. Let's just focus instead. And it's your last day. What do you want people to remember you by? Yeah. And another thing that I like personally is this concept that competition is clarity. I didn't just start Master Talk because I had a purpose, because I had a dream. Yeah. It's also because, to be completely transparent, because I knew I would win. Right. Yeah. When I watched my competition and I realized they were not very good, I got frustrated because I saw a lot of speech coaches lining up their pockets and not sharing their information freely to the world in the same way that Seth Godin does and a lot of influencers I admire. So it wasn't just like let me just try this. Let me just see what happens. It was more about understanding what my competition is doing and saying I have the clarity to know that I can beat them for the intention that I want for my life. Yeah. So depending on what your viewers want, if they want to like make a big dent in the world, I think it's very important, because a lot of people don't like to say this, but I love it. I think comparison is a great tool if you use it in the right way. Not in the sense of, oh, you have more than me, this is terrible, but rather, let me compare myself to you and see what it took for you to get there. So then I'll understand what the price of admission is. What do I have to pay to get there? Is it money? Is it 10 years of weekly consistent videos? And then by understanding that price, what the price tag is of that goal, then you'll quickly figure out without trying anything to be like, I don't want to do this. Good example, being a professional athlete. Yeah. I knew very quickly that I couldn't get there, not because I wasn't good enough or I was talking down to myself, because I didn't want to put in the work for that specific goal. It seemed crazy to me. versus YouTube. I can do it forever. I don't care if it takes me 20 years to get there. I'm willing to bet my remaining lifespan on making that successful.
You made a lot of different points there, and I loved how you're thinking that it's kind of almost like the opposite to what I was saying, like kind of almost a response in a way, but it almost seemed like an extension, not even a debate, so to speak. Like I love that debate mentality, like when we're talking, having that opposing viewpoint, because that's how we learn. And so I'm very happy that you shared. So thank you. I don't think it's actually that different. I think it's just a unique way of looking at it. Finding that passion, finding that why, kind of as that breaking it down, it's not really a point of like, hey, this is what I'm really caring about. It's more about this, like, sometimes it just clicks. Like you were an entrepreneur in the sense that you saw a hole in the market, you found the blue ocean where they would like, hey, there's no one in this space doing it the way they want to. Same with me. Same with I saw some people focusing on self-education. There was Jay Cross, who did a do-it-yourself degree. He stopped doing it. Lori Picard, who did her no-pay MBA, and Scott Young, MIT Challenge. They had all these like unique self-education endeavors, but they weren't applicable to the wide-ranging audience. A lot of them are also very old too. They're like a decade old. And so they're not necessarily applicable to the modern viewpoint of self-education and courses. When Scott Young did his MIT Challenge, the MOOCs weren't existing. Online courses were not in the same level as they are now. So there was an opportunity for me to disrupt that space, just like there was one for you in the creator of the content for speaking. And I've definitely seen like the wide-ranging content that you have, like the karaoke video or like your upcoming comedy video. You're taking the approach of like, hey, how can I take this micro-generalist idea, like this idea of that no one else is comparing to this concept, and you're making content on it, which is going to give you a unique perspective for the audience to see, and that's going to hypergrow your channel. I would say that's what you're doing. You're niching down. You're also taking the unique approach, and I love that.
I appreciate that. I think the point that I want to drive here, and I love this, and I don't think we've ever disagreed with each other in this entire conversation, to be honest. I think the key is when you're listening to me speak, when you're listening to Dustin speak, it's not about this person is right. I'd rather challenge your audience to say, what do I like about Brenden, but also what do I not like about what he's saying? And your goal as the critical thinker who's listening to this podcast is to say, I like this part. The way he built Master is interesting, but I don't like that he's so aggressive all the time. Let me push that away. So it's all about taking but just the issue that I'm flagging is most people don't even bother going in that direction. Mm-hmm. When you listen to a podcast, when you read a book, all most people do is they listen to it, they read it at a surface level, take notes, and they just pick up dots. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to actually connect them, to use Seth Godin's terminology. They don't actually go, what this person is doing, despite how successful they are, doesn't make sense. Like I could spend an hour talking about all of the flaws in Lewis Howes's game, despite how more successful he is than I am. And I can do the same thing with Gary Vee and everyone. But the point is not because I'm better than them. The point is I have a perspective on things, and you need to develop your own if you are to build a business or a unique mission or an art piece or anything that is truly unique to you.
It's the ability to distill that idea, analyze it for your own understanding, and be able to break it down. Do you agree with it or not? It doesn't really quite matter if you do or not, but it helps you break it down more. How can one master speaking as a skill?
Right. So speaking as a skill, it always comes down to two things: accountability and public speaking. Why? Because if you know exactly why you want to master public speaking, you're really keen on making your message heard, you'll always put in the work. Whether it's watching videos, hiring a speech coach, going to Toastmasters, practicing with your friends, you'll always put in the work to get better over time. And to give you an analogy, just so you're not intimidated or your viewers aren't intimidated, the reason I'm able to speak the way I speak is because I've presented over 500 times.
Yeah.
Right? That's a big number. And the big number is useful to tell you that if you haven't presented 500 times, then it's okay if you're not good at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because I was a terrible speaker the first time I presented. Mm-hmm. But it's as I got better, as I started finding a public speaking why, which at the beginning was winning case competitions, and now it's transitioned to convincing every single human being that listens to me, whether it's in a podcast, audio, video format, or any format, that at the end when I close my mouth, even if they don't know the tips, even if they don't really know anything about public speaking, they're at least convinced that maybe I can do this.
Yeah. Well, you spent these years distilling and analyzing your own growth and your own challenges that you faced, and you were able to iterate yourself and your skills based off of that changes. And like you might even only be like journeyman level, which is way more than everyone else, and you have way to grow. You have that positive growth curve, and you have that continuing exponentiality of it. And so why is your goal in life to be that number one speaking coach in the world?
The answer has nothing to do with vanity. It's all about, because I believe that the person who will be number one, however that is defined, it doesn't really matter, is the person who wants to help everybody communicate better. And up till this point in time, no one has actually achieved that goal. Because the issue with organizations or people who charge a lot of money for public speaking is they'll never get to everybody because everybody can't afford them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what my friend said when he approached me. He said, you know, you're going to coach one-on-one people the rest of your life. You're going to make good money like every other speech coach. But what are you going to do for everybody else?
Yeah.
What are you going to do for the people who can't afford you? What are you going to do for those people? Because when you die, all of your ideas will go with you. And that's when it clicked for me. Even if I was young at the time, I still said, well, I have 4 decades to really refine my content. Why don't I just start now?
Right.
So for me, being the number one speaker or speaking coach in the world doesn't mean having the best clients. It doesn't mean making the most money, but rather means how many human beings in the world that will ever exist said I could master public speaking because Brenden told me I could. And I was able to brainwash as many people as possible into believing that. That's why I want to be number one, because I want to be the most generous, not because I want to be the most wealthy.
That's how you measure it. And it kind of going back to some of the people we've talked about earlier, Gary Vee and Steve Jobs. It's the Gary Vee actually talks about how he wants to be the greatest entrepreneur in the world, and he measures that not by how much money he makes per se, but like how many people see him as entrepreneur. And the person who built the biggest tower, in his analogy, the person who's built the biggest company without tearing other people down. That's how he defined it. And Steve Jobs talks about how the people who think they're the ones who can change the world are going to be the ones that do. And that same mentality that you're employing there, I think, is along with those greats like that.
I love that. And just to build on that, to add more value to you, to everyone listening, it's not just in V's ability to just say, I want to build the biggest building in town, but it's also the level of granular detail in how he thinks about it, which shows how much he really cares about legacy. He doesn't just think about, oh, I want to build the biggest business. It's more about, I actually want to be a rock star.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be the person that everyone looks up to. I want to be famous, which is interesting. He says that intentionally because there's a lot of good guys out there, good gals. Like Warren Buffett, he's a cool guy. Like, he's a nice guy. But no one's going to model their life against him because he's not a rock star. And by rock star, I mean he doesn't go on Instagram and like preach his knowledge, right? So what's interesting about V that I like and how intentional he is he says, I want to be a rock star, so that every 15, 20, 25-year-old looks at me and says, I want to be that guy. Mm-hmm. So somebody who's somewhat nice will say to himself or herself, oh, I need to be nice if I want to be successful. And that's the way in how he's changed culture. So what you'll notice with the greats is not that they want to change the world, but they're very specific in that way. They don't just say, I want to do this. They say, I'm going to do this by doing X, Y, Z, A, B, C. Even if most of the human population will only see the surface, they won't see the iceberg at the bottom of the ocean.
And it's kind of that concept of the overnight success too. Like they always say that like, oh, this person is an overnight success after 10 years of doing that particular thing. I think that being a polymath is not for everyone, but I adopted that concept as my why because I want to be able to do many things in my life. I grew up liking a lot of different things. I love video games. I love music. I love talking to people. I love having people like you in my life, that kind of thing. And I wanted a way that I could build my life to incorporate every single one of those. I did not want to choose a specialty, quote unquote. I wanted to have multiple specialties throughout my life. And I built PolyInnovator to be that platform, to be that kind of person like, hey, the next 5 years, I do this endeavor. The next 5 years or 10 years after that, I do that endeavor. And that way we can incorporate that same drive and ikigai and why in my own way, but in your own way too.
Definitely agree. I love that perspective on things. I think it's really about like what is it that you want to achieve and how do you reverse track that? Like for me, if I end up not having enough time for my personal development book, I won't care as long as Master Talk becomes successful, even if it takes me 40 years. I don't think it will take me 40 years, but if that is what it needs to be, then I'll sacrifice my my ability to have built other things, to have been lucky to have just built this thing.
Totally agree. It's one of those things where when it clicks like that, like, hey, this is what I want to do. This is my why. For me, the same thing with the Polycast and PolyInnovator. If I have to use my entire life to do it, I'm okay with that. My grandmother, and I know a lot of people's parents and stuff like that, and she talks to me about how getting like a full-time job or something like that to really accelerates my own personal life and be able to have kids and be able to pay for bills. But I see that I'm not trying to monetize this brand at the moment. I don't feel like I need to just yet. I want to provide value first before I even try to maybe make a book or something like that. And that's why a lot of people think that, hey, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to make any money off of that. But it's not about the money. It's about the impact that you're talking about too. And that's what I want out of it. That's what I want to do with my life. And that's why I'm doing this. I want to be able to convey that knowledge and that skill of learning. That's it.
Love that. That's awesome.
So kind of segueing again, I teach swimming, and that lung training helped me with karaoke. How did you train your lungs for singing?
Yeah, so for me with karaoke, there's no specific tactic with the lungs that you're specifically referring to. But what I do think karaoke gives you is it allows you to practice your voice at very high levels of projection. So normally in society, you're not supposed to raise your voice literally. You're having a meeting with somebody. If you start talking very loudly, people are going to say, hey, whoa, what are you doing? But in karaoke, you could be as loud as you want. You can literally yell in a karaoke room. Nobody cares because it's a safe cultural space that allows you to project yourself. So what's great that I recommend to introverts specifically, or people who don't like to speak very loudly, is just do a bunch of karaoke. Because that way people will like it that you're speaking very loudly, and that'll increase your vocal projection. So that's the way that I kind of was able to build a very high range. So when I speak, I can speak very loudly, but if I also want to speak with very low vocal variety and I want to say something sad or something that maybe most people wouldn't like to hear, then I can change my variation in that way. And that was almost purely through karaoke.
Yeah, that vocal manipulation. And I think that's why when I wrote that question there, I thought you were going to say something along those lines, where it's going to be that training through karaoke, through singing, being able to control that. Like the vocal range skill is not necessarily just for karaoke. It's also for speaking. It's also for conveying knowledge and being able to talk low like this, like you're talking about. And so I think finally wrapping up today, what would you say would be our call to action for the audience today?
Right. I would say the call to action is find your public speaking why. If you're someone who wants to master communication and public speaking, you need to understand why you want to do it. If you're just trying to do it for the next promotion, I don't believe you can be a world-class speaker. But if you're doing it because there's a message that's so important that you need to share it, that it's so like you're willing to give up everything for that message, I promise you can be a great speaker without a doubt.
Fantastic. That's really actionable and people can really take that to heart. And so thank you for coming on to the show. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, for sure. So you can message me on Instagram. I'm at Master Your Talk. Very accessible. Just send me a message if you need any help or you want video recommendations or really anything. I'm always happy to chat. And also feel free to check out my YouTube videos. I'm at Master Talk. So that's in one word.
I'll make sure I have the links in the description, especially to that YouTube channel. It's awesome. And I really think that the way you conveyed yourself on this podcast today is very interesting itself too. So if you're listening to this podcast, another actionable step would be to, I should have said this in the beginning, listen to the way he controls his voice, the way he presents himself, because there was a lot of nuance to everything he said today. And I could tell just by listening in, he captivated me as a host to where I got into a state of flow throughout the entire conversation. We were able to really focus on everything he said. I have a hard time with active listening. I did not have a hard time today. So once again, thank you for being on the show, and take those steps that he said today to heart and try to find that why, try to find that passion you can use to convey your speaking career. Thank you.